Hey everybody, and welcome back to the next part in my Unlocking the Fretboard series from my YouTube channel. So this is a mini series I started last week, and I started with the topic of intervals and interval shapes and learning those really well on our guitar fretboard. A lot of folks, I got a lot of great comments from it, and I think it's a really important topic to talk about. Now, having said that, I'm not going to talk about all the things I talked about last week in that. Please go back and check out that video if you have any questions or if you haven't learned those patterns yet. They're going to be necessary for what we're going to talk about today, sort of knowing those really well, so that the two things, what we're going to talk about today and what we talked about last time, are going to work together. Okay, I'll have it in a card up here somewhere on YouTube that you can click on and go check that out first if you want to watch these in order. I'll also create a YouTube playlist and keep adding these lessons to them as we go along. So these little interval shapes, I kind of, as a quick recap, I kind of described it as, thinking of all the different intervals as we would, a power chord, right? We all know, the almighty power chord, we have that little shape, right? But if we could learn all of our interval shapes like that, that's going to give us a lot of power on our guitar. And what do I mean by power? Well, what can we do with these interval shapes once we learn them? Well, we could build chords with them. We can recognize existing chords that maybe we're playing that we never knew the name of or knew the theory behind. And we could create arpeggio shapes, right? Which are basically just the notes of a chord played individually. And you might say, well, why do we need that? Well, I don't think anybody's going to argue that a really good solid knowledge of as many chords as possible in our chord vocabulary is going to be a bad thing. That's going to allow us to be able to do much more in the way of composition, learning other people's music, improvising, understanding what we're playing over top of, etc., right? And understanding arpeggios is going to help us to come up with all sorts of interesting lead guitar ideas and the ability to play over many more situations. So in this series, we do want to talk a lot about arpeggios and chords, but number one, now that we know the interval shapes, we also need to know how they can be applied in a musical fashion. And to do that, we have to have a good working knowledge of chord theory, chord chemistry, we might call it, how chords are built, where do chords come from, right? And I think that's a topic that a lot of people get very intimidated by and maybe even turned off of, because it seems overwhelming, and it really is not. Let me preface this with a little disclaimer. I've seen a lot of different terminology used to describe the same things in music at times, okay? The thing about chords are, sometimes a chord can be named in more than one way, and some people will argue that this is the correct way, and some people will argue that that's the correct way. That's not the point of what I'm talking about today. I'm gonna try to give you kind of my way of mentally sorting all this out. And after many years of teaching, I thought about it a lot and wanted to present information in a usable manner, right? I find a lot of music theory people shy away from because it's overwhelming, like I said, and it doesn't make sense to them, or it seems like it's going to be too much. And I just want to strip it down to the basics so that we can access it in a very usable fashion, like I said, okay? So here's how I view chords and chord construction, and it can be the simplest thing. I, first of all, mentally group all chords into families or types, whatever you want to call them. Some people may say calling them families isn't the right thing, but here's what I mean by that. I automatically know and think of chords as either falling into being a major type chord or in the major chord family, a minor type chord, a dominant type chord, a suspended type chord, a diminished type chord, or an augmented type chord. Really, that's going to cover all the basis of everything we're ever going to really come across in music. Now, if we understand what the characteristics of each of those chord families are in terms of the intervals that make them up, we really can understand any chord that we see the name of. We could have a chord that, on our guitar that we've never played before and understand exactly what it is right away. And that'll make more sense as we go along. So what is a chord? Well, a chord is just 3 or more notes played at the same time. Well, where do those notes come from? Well, I guess the short answer is they come from a major scale. Like we talked about last time, the same place the intervals come from, right? So we number them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 1 again. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and so on and so forth. We don't get up into the 15s or the 14s, but so that's where chords are also going to come from. So we talked last time about intervals, and we said, you know, this is always an interval of a third. So is this, so is this, right? So is this, I'm sorry, I wasn't watching where I was going. So is this. Okay, so if we can find out the spellings, I guess, or the chemistry of each chord, it's going to allow us to be able to visualize them on our fretboard with the knowledge we talked about last time of knowing our interval patterns, okay? So let's start talking about the major chord family. Well, how do we build a major chord? Well, the smallest chord we can have is a triad. So let's look at the triads, right? So a major chord is going to be spelled out as a 1, a 3, and a 5, okay? Or, you know, the root note, a major third, and a perfect fifth, which would be like this in the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this note, root, third, fifth. And I just did the octave of the root up there. So if we can visualize that, we can play the arpeggio like I just did, or we could create the chord, right? So with what we talked about last time, if I know that I need a 1 and a 3 and a 5, I can know this is my 1. I'm just using A as an example. And there's a 3 here. The 5 is on the same string. Well, we've got to move something, right? Well, we also know from what we talked about last time, there's a 5 right there. So, you know, there's a little A major chord. I could also keep the 5 here and do the 3 up here because that's another interval we talked about last time. There's a major chord, right? Now I can add the octave to the 1 in. I also know there's another 5 up here. And there's another 1 up here. Just like we talked about last time. I know I'm zooming through the interval shapes, but we already discussed that. So go back and check that video. And there we have that, you know, traditional sort of bar chord with the root note on the 6th string, right? But now we understand why. There's a 1, there's a 5, there's another 1, there's a 3, there's a 5, and there's a 1. Right? So if we can visualize those patterns on the fretboard, and we know the spelling of a particular chord, we're going to be able to figure out and play or recognize any chord that is presented to us by name, right? And also play, you know, the arpeggio that goes along with it, which is going to be very useful for our lead playing. Now, not too many people aren't going to know, you know, with any guitar experience at all, aren't going to know these, you know, major chords. So that's not really telling us much. Well, what else happens in the major chord family? Well, we can put on, and in any family for that matter, we can put on what we call chord extensions, okay? So an extension is just adding sort of color tones onto it. So, you know, taking our major triad, we could add a 7 onto it. We could add a 9 onto it. We could add a 7 or a 9 onto it. An 11, a 13. Well, if we go through all of those, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, we've really covered all of the notes of the major scale, right? 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. 11, 13 is 7 notes. There's 7 notes in the major scale. A lot of people ask, why do we skip over with just all odd numbers? Well, what happens is, you know, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 8 is back to 1, so 9 is going to be the same as 2, right? 3 is just going to be like 10. 4 is going to be like 11. 5 is going to be like 12, right? And so on and so forth. 7 is 14. We just add 7 to it all. So by going 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 is 2, 11 is 4, and 6 is 13. So we utilize all of those notes anyways. That's just kind of the major scale, but spread out as an arpeggio, and that would be like a major 13th arpeggio, right? And again, all the patterns that we talked about last time, right? Okay, so in the major chord family, there's just no alterations, right? We don't sharp or flat anything. It would just be 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, right? So a 1, 3, 5, and a 7, that would be a major 7th chord. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 would be a major 9th chord. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 would be a major 11th chord. And a 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13 would be a major 13th chord. Lots of notes, not even possible on a guitar. We only have 6 strings, right? We usually will omit something like the 5th or other notes, right, to just sort of make it more accessible on the guitar. But as the theory part of it goes, that's how the major chord family works. So if we can just remember, start on 1 and count by 2s up to 13, right? 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. That's the characteristics of the major type chords, or the major chord family, if that makes any sense. Okay, so we then say, well, if I can apply those and visualize those on my guitar, I can start building and recognizing chords, right? Take a major 7th chord. I know I need a 1, a 3, a 5, and a 7. So I have my 1 here. I know that there's a 5 right here, right? Just because of my shapes I talked about last time. I know there's a 3 right here. Well, those are on the same string. Not really going to be useful as a chord, as an arpeggio, not bad, but not as a chord. There's a 7 right here. There's a 3 right here. There's a major 7th chord, right? 1, 5, we have our 3 up here, and we have our 7 right there. I could also spread that out and put the 5 up here, right? So I have my 7, my 3, and my 5. So these are just some quick examples of just sort of seeing how quickly we can start applying this knowledge to our guitar once we understand the shapes and once we understand the chord chemistry, or how to spell the chords. So very simple, let's tuck that in our memory banks. Major chords. We will have the triad, which is 1, 3, 5, and then we build our color tones onto that. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. Nothing else to remember, no sharps, no flats, nothing fancy. Let's move on to our minor type chords. Well, we're going to follow the same rules as far as starting on 1 and jumping by 2s, or counting by 2s, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. But the two things we have to remember with minor type chords is we have to make the 3 a flat, and we have to make the 7 a flat. So a full-blown minor 13th chord would be spelled out 1 flat 3, 5 flat 7, 9, 11, 13. Okay, so what does it mean to make an interval flat? We move it back 1 fret, right? So instead of a 3rd being here, I kept the root note the same, right? So there's 1 flat 3, 5. This used to be our 7. That's going to be our flat 7. So whereas this was a major 7th arpeggio, 1, 3, 5, 7, this would be a minor, 1 flat 3, 5, flat 7. Okay, so I have my 1 and my flat 3, my 1 and my 5, and my 1 and my flat 7. Okay, so that's very simple stuff. So really, for all our minor chords, all we have to worry about is a flat 3 and a flat 7. So 1 flat 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, 13. And there would be kind of like a minor 13th arpeggio. So far, let's recap. Major chords, start on 1, count by 2s up to 13. No alterations, meaning no sharps or flats. Minor chords, same thing. Start on 1. Count up to 13 by 2s, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, but make the 3 and the 7 flat. We're going to be able to build anything. Somebody asks you for a minor 9th chord. You're going to go, 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7, and then I got to add a 9 in there. We have our 1, our flat 7, our flat 3, our 5, and our 9. Right? That's simple, okay? So really important now, I think you're starting to realize how those interval shapes are such a major part of what we're doing here, and why we have to know them so well without almost any hesitation to be able to use them in a musical fashion, right? Somebody says another example, minor with a 6th on it, right? Well, we know we have our 1 and our flat 3 here. We know that this is a 6, right? We know that this is a 5. So right there we have our 1, our 5, our flat 3, and that was a 6, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or there was our 3, and make it flat. And we put a 5 on it. Yeah, maybe a chord you like, maybe it's not, but we have the ability to be able to play it and utilize it effortlessly, right? We could also make an arpeggio out of it. There's 1 flat 3. There's our 6, right? Okay, so it's going to open up a lot of possibilities. So major and minor, simple enough. Let's move on to the dominant chords. Now, there is no dominant triad. There's only the smallest dominant chord is a dominant 7th chord, okay? And here's why. I like to kind of say, and some people might argue with me, the dominant's kind of a combination of a major 7th and a minor 7th, right? So a dominant chord would be spelled out, a dominant 7th chord would be spelled out like this. It's a 1, a 3, or a major 3rd, a normal 3rd, right? Major 3rd, 5, and flat 7. So it takes sort of the 3 from major, but the flat 7th from minor, and that gives us that bluesy kind of a tonality. So we take our 1, our 3, our 5, and our flat 7. Right? It's that simple. Beyond that, we can add a 9, 11, or a 13, right? So we can have a 1, a 3, a 5, a flat 7, a 9, 11, a 13. There's a little dominant 13th arpeggio, okay? And again, we can build chords around this. You can say, okay, I'm going to take my major 3rd here, and I'm going to put my flat 7th here. Come up there and put a 13 on it, 6 or a 13. In this case, we're going to call it a 13. The reason we wouldn't call it a 6 in this case is because we already have the 7 in there, so we don't want a note kind of behind that, right? We'd spell that out 1, 3, 5, flat 7, and then a 13. If the flat 7 was gone and we moved it to a 6, then we would call it a 6 because we only have the 1, the 3. I can put a 5 there too. So there's a major 6th chord. Turn that into a 7th or a dominant 7th with a 13, right? So really simple stuff. So here again, let's recap. Major, we're going to start on the 1. We're going to count by 2s all the way up. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. No alterations, no sharps and flats. Minor. We are going to do the same thing, 1 through up, counting by 2s up to 13, but we're going to flat the 3 and flat the 7. That's it. Dominant, we're going to do the same thing, but we're only going to have a flat 7th. We've just talked about a huge percentage of the chords we're ever going to need. Majors, minors, and 7th chords, right? And it's that simple. We've just got to remember a few basic things. The idea of how we build them with the intervals, counting by 2s with the odd numbers, right? And then we just add, a flat 3 and a flat 7th for minor chords, and only a flat 7th for dominant with the major 3rd or the natural 3rd, right? Pretty simple. Now there's going to be another chord family that some people say, isn't really a chord family. I've heard that said. And that's the suspended chords. And sometimes you'll see sus2 and sus4, right? So you might say, well, 2 and 4, all of a sudden we have even numbers in there. Well, the reason sus chords are considered suspended chords is because they do not contain a 3rd. If you noticed, major, minor, and dominant 7th all had some form of a 3rd, whether it was a natural 3rd or a flat 3rd, major 3rd or a minor 3rd, right? But with suspended, we get rid of that. So a suspended 2nd chord would be spelled out 1, 2, 5, and a suspended 4th chord would be spelled out 1, 4, 5. If you notice, we have our 1 and our 5 here, and normally we have a 3 in the middle. We've taken the 3 out, we've replaced it with either a 2 or a 4. If there is a 3, and we use a 2 or a 4, we have to kind of kick the 2 and the 4 outside of that little 1, 3, 5 thing, and either call the 2 a 9 or the 4 an 11. Okay, so for instance, a suspended 2nd chord, 1, 2, 5, would be spelled out kind of like this, 1, 2, 5. Again, I could then, here's a 5, here's a 2. Here's a 5, here's a 2. Right, here's a 2, here's a 5. Right, 1, 4, 5 would be our suspended 4th, right? Right, we could do something along those lines there. So if I had a 3rd in there, though, let's see here. If I was to go 1, 5, there's my 2, but if I add the 3rd, right, now I would consider this a 9 instead of a 2, because they're the same thing, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Same note. So if I have this, it's an A suspended 2nd, but if I add this note in the 3rd, now I've got a major add 9. Famous riff. A major, add 9. F sharp minor, add 9, right? It's some really classic riffs using this kind of theory to explain it, right? So sus2, sus4. Basically, if we don't have a 3rd and we have a 2 or a 4 in there, we'll kind of lump them as sus2 and sus4. So again, major chords, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, no alterations. Minor chords, we do the same counting, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, but we make the 3rd flat and the 7th flat. Dominant chords, we have a flat 7th only. normal third, natural third, major third, whatever you want to call it, with a flat seventh or a minor seventh. So 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, 13. Okay? Suspended, we get rid of the 3 when there's no 3 and we replace it with a 2 or a 4. Okay? There's got to be something in between the 1 and the 5, otherwise it's just an interval, right? Okay. So interesting stuff so far. The final two we have are diminished and augmented. So diminished, same sort of idea, we would just count up by 2 starting on 1, but there's more alterations this time. We're going to have a flat 3, a flat 5, and a double flat 7th, okay, which is actually just a 6th, but it's referred to as a double flat 7th. So, if this is our 1, we have a flat 3, we have a flat 5, we have a double flat 7. Very odd kind of a tonality to it. But again, nothing else to remember. Flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7th. And augmented is just going to be a sharp 5th. So again, a 1, a 3, a sharp 5. So 1, 3. Okay, so a sharp 5. We know where our 5s are. We just simply raise that up. Very unique sounds to these, right? There's a diminished 7th, right? So that's it. So we say major. Nothing to remember as far as alterations. 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. Minor. Same thing, but we flat the 3 and the 5. Dominant. We simply flat the 7th. Everything else stays the same. Suspended. We get rid of the 3. We put a 2 or a 4 in its place. Diminished. Flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7th. And augmented, sharp 5. And then we can have our extensions added on to those. Now, sometimes you are going to have some situations where there's going to be an alteration that's not normal to the family. Maybe they're going to flat or sharp a certain interval. Well, that's pretty simple because really the name is going to tell us everything, right? So somebody could throw in a sharp 11th, let's say. So a major with a sharp 11th, right? Which would be like a sharp 4. So we'd say 1, 3, 5, sharp 11, you know, and again, this is not going to be difficult. We know that here is the 11 or the 4, that's the sharp 11, right? It's also going to be right there, so major. See how quickly I can figure that out. Now that may or may not be a chord you like. It's a very Lydian sound to it, but if you notice, I have a 1 and a 5, I have a 3, and there's my sharp 4. Back to a normal 4, right? Which would be an A major at 11, right? A major at sharp 11. There's maybe a chord we would not have thought of doing before. But now we understand exactly what it is and where it comes from. So sometimes you will get these alterations, right? You'll get a dominant chord with a sharp 5, or you'll get, you know, a dominant 7th chord with a sharp 5, right? And again, it's very simple. If we have our... And these are kind of what they consider altered chords. I have my 1, my flat 7, I have my 3. There's your dominant. And I have a sharp 5. But if it says that in the name, sharp 5, flat 5, something along those lines, we just do what we're told and it becomes that chord and we alter the name appropriately. Now, there is one other situation I can think of off the top of my head. Maybe I'm missing some here, but you know, Google's also your friend. We can do a lot with just searching up information. We live in that information age now. Once we understand, this is more about the concept of how these chords are built and where they're coming from and how we can apply those shapes we talked about last time, right? Is a half diminished chord. Now, if we remember, the diminished chord had a 1, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7th. A half diminished chord would have the same but only a flat 7th. So it would be spelled out 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. Okay? So it's kind of like a minor 7th, flat 5, right? So you could hear it referred to, and this is what I was saying before, is you're going to see a lot of times there could be numerous ways to name different chords. A half diminished chord is also a minor 7th, flat 5, right? So if we had a minor 7th chord, here's my 5, I know exactly where that is, I'm going to make it flat. There's a minor 7th, flat 5, or an A half diminished chord, right? I have my 1, my flat 3, my flat 7, my flat 3, my flat 5. I move that 5 up, to here to a normal 5, I've got a minor 7th. 1, flat 7, flat 3, and my 5. Half diminished, right? Now if I take the flat 7 and move it back another fret to make a double flat 7, now I have a diminished chord, right? So diminished 7th chord. So we have minor 7th flat 5, diminished 7th, okay? But again, I can understand this because I know how they're spelled out, okay? I hope that made sense, and I hope I didn't go too fast with that. It's really only going to make sense with what I'm doing on the fretboard if you go back and watch the first video and see how those intervals fall and lay all over the fretboard. I also have a package up on my website available for download if you're interested with all of those patterns written out, which I think is a really handy thing to have. As a PDF, you could print out and always have that reference there, right? So go back and watch that video. But again, to recap here, we basically have major, minor, dominant, suspended, diminished, and augmented chords, with or without alterations that can happen, you know, by the chord name. But the characteristics are, major, we don't have to remember any alterations. It's 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13. That's how we're going to build out those chords. So a major 7th chord is 1, 3, 5, 7. Minor chords are going to always have a flat 3 and a flat 7th. Okay, so a minor triad, 1 flat 3 5. A minor 7th, 1 flat 3 5 flat 7. And from there, the 9, 11, 13 stay the same. Dominant chords are going to only have a flat 7th. So we're going to have 1, 3, 5, flat 7, 9, 11, 13. Pretty simple. Suspended chords, get rid of the 3. When we don't have a 3, we're going to replace it with a 2 or a 4. If it's replaced with a 2, we have a sus 2. If we replace it with a 4, we have a sus 4. So if we ever see those written, we'll know what that's talking about. Diminished and augmented. Diminished chords, flat 3, flat 5, double flat 7th. Everything else is going to stay the same. And then augmented, we do a sharp 5. Okay? It's that simple, folks. So when we take that knowledge, here's what I want you to do to get the most out of this. Go back and watch the first video. Memorize the interval shapes all over our guitar fretboard so they're effortless. Okay? Then, with the knowledge we talked about today of those chord families, those basic 6 chord families or chord types, we can then apply that and start building these chords out all over the fretboard, moving the notes to wherever we need, and coming up with, sparking some really new compositional ideas, coming up with new ways, maybe new arpeggio patterns we haven't played, and so on and so forth, okay? So what's coming next in this series? Well, next time we're going to actually dive in and talk about arpeggios very much in depth and my approach to those and how we can use what we've already talked about to really map the fretboard in a way that's going to improve our lead playing immensely. So that's going to be really handy. And we'll also get into talking about different chord voicings using what we talked about today as well. So guys, I hope that was clear. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment and I'll do my best to get back to you. I get quite a few now. I'm really trying my best to answer them, but I don't have quite as much time to get to them, but I really do try, and I really appreciate the comments, guys. I really, really do appreciate the support. So I hope you liked the video. If you do, please share it with somebody you think will get some use out of it. Like the video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Much more coming in this series, some other lesson type series, and a lot more with our Line 6 Helix tones and whatnot too. Okay, go check out my Line 6 Helix Marketplace presets as well if you'd like. And I will be back soon with more content. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in, and ciao for now.